Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Social Studies. I'm going to pause for 1 second. Okay, and I am back. I was not ready to proceed without my fun little red laser pointer to play with to keep me occupied as I'm teaching. All right, so this is 5B.11, More Manifest Destiny. It is this sheet which you have already filled in 5.10. So the previous lesson, today we are going to do the the back of it. And again, we're talking about manifest destiny, which is the belief that it was fate or God's will or meant to be, that the U.S. should keep expanding, at least from the Atlantic to the Pacific, if not further, if not more. And you can pause me and sing the Manifest Destiny song to get you in the mood, and then come back. Okay, hopefully you will have sung it and are now back. This was previously Why Did People Expand? Gold, God, and Glory. Today we're going to go through the major pieces of the puzzle that kind of put us where we are today. So the major pieces of the puzzle: Louisiana, Florida, Texas annexation, Mexican cession, Oregon country. Now, we either have or will, depending on your cohort, discussed most of these in more detail in class. So this is kind of going through a quick refresher, either bring back some memories or a little foreshadowing, depending on your point of view, and fill in the notes so that we have them, because we will have a test coming up sooner rather than later. So these are the major pieces, and I will have you label, at least recognize, not like exactly down to each little squiggly, but you should have an approximate idea of the Northwest Territory, of Florida, Louisiana Territory, Texas, Mexican cession, and the Oregon country. Maybe as a bonus, I'll throw in the Gadsden Purchase if you're lucky. We'll see. Probably not today, though. All right, Florida, as you know, was part of Spain, home to Seminole Indians who lived in this area, as well as people escaping slavery. Spain was not doing anything to help the United States out there, which they didn't really have any reason to. So after the War of 1812, Andrew Jackson comes over here to secure the border with his troops, invades Florida, and Florida ends up selling us the land as part of a treaty known as the Adams-Onis Treaty, which you do not need to know. Texas, I'm going to go through here quickly again, but also originally part of New Spain, a part of Mexico is really what we're looking for there. It was part of Mexico, which was a Spanish colony when this all begins. Mexico will gain its independence during the time. Texas is going to hire an American named Stephen Austin to bring settlers from America, from the United States, to Texas because they want some development there. These people agree to be Mexican citizens, become Catholic, and follow Mexican laws, including no slavery. They don't want to follow these laws. They'd get away without following the laws. It's kind of, if you remember back to Unit 3, The Road to the Revolution, this is a period kind of known as salutary neglect, where even though technically Mexico is supposed to be governing Texas, they're kind of just leaving the Texans to do their own thing. And it is beneficial except for the Native Americans and African Americans, whom it is very much not helpful to them. All right. Eventually, when Mexico gets tough, Texas secedes. That means they break away. They form their own country, this nice flag, and they immediately ask to join the United States. Well, after winning their independence. Remember the Alamo? If you don't, we will talk about the Alamo, but that's where the independence leaders are mostly killed. But instead of ending the independence movement, it kind of adds more fire to them. Once winning independence, Texas asks to join the U.S. The U.S. says "No" spells no, or in Spanish, no. The U.S. refuses to annex. No annexation of Texas, says these people from New York, because it would tip the balance in favor of slavery. We had this balance between the number of slave states and free states, and we didn't want to tip it. We also worried about it leading to war with Mexico. So for 10 years, Texas is its own country, the Republic of Texas. And then in 1845, 10 years later, the United States does annex, which means add on Texas, and that leads to the Mexican War. Now, during the Mexican War, the United States captures, it's pretty much a one-sided victory here. The United States just rolls through and captures all the way down past Mexico City, really. And then Mexico surrenders, and we work out this peace treaty with them whereby we give them back most of their territory, and they recognize this as the border. So they recognize that Texas is now part of the United States, and they kind of throw in or cede, CEDE, which means give up the rest of this land, which becomes known as the Mexican Cession because they ceded it to us, Mexican Cession. All right, cession means to formally give up rights to property or something like a territory or whatever. That's cession. Mexican Cession was when they give up that land. There's the Mexican Cession. Now, that's how we received it, how we acquired it. That was in 1848. Now, people did not know this at the time, but around almost the exact same time that Mexico is giving up this territory to us, something is happening here in part of the Mexican Cession territory. This is out of order, and that is going to be the discovery of gold, which will bring settlers to California here in the Mexican Cession. All right, Marcus and Narcissa Whitman. You may not have heard of Narcissa, but you probably have heard of Marcus Whitman. Marcus Whitman has a school named after him in Gorham, and which is on Canandaigua Lake. Anyways, Marcus and Narcissa are famous because in 1835 they took a wagon, a covered wagon, a wagon train through what became known as the Oregon Trail. And there were lots of dangers along the way through the Oregon Trail, but they established a plantation. Well, I don't want to call it a plantation because it wasn't necessarily enslavement going on or slavery going on there. A ranch. They established a ranch, kind of a mission. The reason the Marcus and Narcissa came this way was to spread their religion. They were both very religious people and felt that they had to spread their religion to the native people. So they travel by covered wagon out to the Oregon country and settle. Here you see the Whitman mission. Now, the reason that this is important enough that Marcus Whitman not only has a school named after him, but at least for another year or two, he has a statue in the United States Capitol, Statuary Hall, honoring him, because this kind of shows that it is possible for people to travel to the Oregon country all the way out there, thousands of miles in a covered wagon. Not just men, like mountain men, but actually women could do it too, because Narcissa made the trip and it was well publicized at the time. So that's how that was involved, Oregon country. Now that Oregon country is out of order. Don't worry about it. We'll clean it up later. For your purposes, it's not going to make too much of a difference. California, discovering gold out in, you can see the timeline here. Gold is discovered at the same time that the Mexican War ends, that the U.S. gains the Mexican Cession. 1849, there's going to be a gold rush. Thousands of people rushing to California looking for gold. They become known as the 49ers, and it's in the San Francisco area. San Francisco 49ers. Hopefully you can remember that. And then all the way by 1850, that short amount of time later, California is going to become a state. All right, these are some prospecting pictures, people prospecting for gold. We'll talk about them a little bit more in school if we have not already done so. We'll talk about this, how people got there on these clipper ships. These are clipper ships that they were the fastest ships around, a fast way. You could make it to the gold territory in 105 days from the east coast of the United States. So that's about 3 months or so to San Francisco, which became a boom town and boomed from just a small little settlement to a major, major city. And you can see ships became abandoned because their workers would go look for gold. This was one of many gold rushes or silver rushes or lead rushes or copper rushes. People looking for mineral wealth, mining. Mining played a big role, as did furs in the West. All right. Utah is in the Mexican cession as well. It is a unique story because it is settled mostly by families, unlike these other places which were settled mostly by single men out seeking their fortunes. Um, this is going to be one of the first places settled by families, although the Oregon country will be as well, don't get me wrong. But this is one of the earliest places as well, led by Brigham Young, who we'll talk about, the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. They begin in, I'm confused by looking at the map here, sort of Palmyra area, this area, and they travel eventually to the West. It is not a direct route. They go to Illinois, etc., and then they work their way out, mostly on using pushcart wagons in large part, not because many of them could not afford the covered wagons. So this was a huge, huge migration of people to the West, and they end up in Salt Lake City, which becomes the Mormon capital. All right, the Oregon Country. Now, Oregon Country used to extend all the way up to the 5440 line. This was a territory much in dispute because it was claimed by Spain, like everything else. It was claimed by the United States. It was claimed by Britain, and it was claimed by Russia, because if you follow this up the coast, you'll come to the land bridge. Siberia's on the other side. Land bridge is gone, but by boat in the 1800s, it wouldn't have been that hard to travel down. So they all claim this territory. Now, this is kind of a case of possession being the most important part, because most of the settlers here are going to be from either the United States or British North America, which we now know as Canada. So they are the ones who settled here. James K. Polk, when he runs for president, he says we need all the way up to the 5440 line, 5440 latitude, or we will fight. That's the 5440 or fight. He doesn't really mean it, because shortly after becoming president, we sign a peace treaty and puts the boundary at the 49th parallel. All right. Moving on. Covered wagons, people traveling by wagon, the Oregon Trail, laid out by Marcus Whitman and others. Mountain men, mountain men were fur trappers, hunting those darn beavers. I mean, they're beaver darns. They led people to Oregon country. We'll talk about Marcus and Narcissa. The Gadsden Purchase we'll talk about. Alaska and Hawaii we might mention, but they will not be on your test, and that fills in the puzzle. Now, the results. The U.S. grew to its present-day size, the economy grew, more immigrants, the slavery issue became more intense, and Native Americans lost land and ways of life. Where is the note sheet? Okay, here we go. So let's see if we got all of this. Louisiana Territory was purchased from France. Florida had been home to Seminoles, people escaping slavery, purchased from Spain after the U.S., led by Andrew Jackson, had taken it over. Let's see, Texas annexation, originally part of Mexico, which is a Spanish colony. Settlers from the U.S. began to settle there, calling themselves Texans. Then Texas declared independence from Mexico, asked to join the U.S. The U.S. said no, because it would lead to a war with Mexico, and two, it would tip the balance between free and slave states. 10 years later, the U.S. did annex Texas, which led to the Mexican War. Mexican cession was ceded or given up by Mexico after the war. Gold was discovered soon after. Hopefully, if I'm going too fast, you know where that pause button is and you can pause me. 49ers were people who rushed to California seeking gold in 1849. Oregon country, claimed by the U.S., Britain, Spain, Russia, but mostly settled by Americans. The Oregon Trail was the route traveled by thousands in covered wagons to help them reach the Oregon country. And finally, 54-40 or fight was the campaign slogan of James K. Polk, but we set the boundary at 49 latitude. Results of Manifest Destiny. If you did not get these, well, here we go. The U.S. grew to its present day size. The economy grew, more immigrants, the slavery issue more intense, and Native Americans lost lands and way of life. Let me make sure I got this, all of this. U.S. grew to its present day size. Enormous amounts of land opened for settlement. The U.S. economy grew as a result of cheap farmland, which provided food for people working in cities, which could travel now because of the better transportation that was being developed in this time period. An abundance of other natural resources, gold, silver, etc. Trees were a big one. 3, the issue of slavery becomes much more intense. Southern slave states and northern free states disagreed over whether or not slavery should be allowed in the new Western lands. 4, more immigrants came to the U.S. seeking more affordable land. 5, Native Americans lost almost all of their land, often violently, and their ways of life. Many died, and others ended up living on reservations. Reservations that means land set aside for tribes. And an example of this is going to be the Trail of Tears, which we have already talked about, the forced relocation. Okay, that is all. I know it was not as fun and interesting as I would have liked, but we really had to get the notes down. We'll talk about it more in class and have more fun with it there. Thank you and have a pleasant day.